Three Roman historians wrote about Jesus within 80 years of his death: Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Suetonius. Pastors cite them as independent proof that Jesus existed. Non-Christian sources, hostile witnesses who had no reason to fabricate. Open and shut, they say. The Romans confirmed it. But I read what those Romans actually wrote, and the man they describe sounds nothing like the man I was taught to worship. No miracles, no resurrection, no crowds following him through Galilee. Just a criminal executed for sedition, a troublemaker, founder of what Tacitus calls a pernicious superstition that spread like disease from Judea to Rome. If these are our best non-Christian sources, if this is the independent confirmation churches point to, then what exactly are they confirming? Now here's the thing, I didn't go looking for this, I trusted the system. I was assistant teaching an adult Sunday school class about 20 years ago, and the main teacher, a man with 2 shelves of apologetics books and underlines in every margin, pulled out a photocopied page. It was from some Christian evidence handbook, highlighted sentences. Tacitus confirms Jesus. Pliny the Younger confirms Jesus. Even hostile Romans admitted he existed. The teacher read the highlighted parts out loud. 6 words from Tacitus, maybe 8 from Pliny. Clean, clear, prus. I repeated those quotes to the class. I felt confident. We all nodded. The Romans said it happened. Case closed. But I never read the full passages. Not then, not for years. It never occurred to me that someone might highlight 6 words and leave out the 30 words around them that change what those 6 words mean. Then one night, maybe 8 months ago, winter, the house quiet, laptop open on the kitchen table, coffee going cold, I thought, I should actually read what Tacitus wrote. Not the apologetic summary, the actual text. Annals 15, chapter 44. The whole paragraph, I found it online. Translated from Latin, public domain, anyone can read it. And I sat there staring at the screen, reading words I had quoted for 2 decades without ever checking. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. That's what Tacitus wrote. Not 6 words. 106. Christus suffered the extreme penalty. Yes, that's the part churches quote, and the rest, most mischievous superstition, source of the evil, hideous and shameful. Those words are right there. In the same sentence, the Roman historian your pastor cites to prove Jesus existed spent the whole paragraph describing Christianity as a disease. I sat at that table for a long time. The laptop screen dimmed after a while. I moved the mouse to wake it back up, read it again. And I thought, why didn't anyone tell me this? Not that Tacitus was wrong, not that the passage was fake, just, why didn't anyone read me the whole thing? Let me walk you through what the Romans actually said. All 3 of them. Not the apologetics version, the version they wrote. We'll start with Tacitus, because he's the one pastors cite most often. Tacitus was a Roman senator and historian. Born around 56 AD, died around 120. He held some of the highest offices in the empire: consul, proconsul of Asia, member of the priestly colleges. He had access to imperial archives, senatorial records, eyewitness accounts. When he wrote history, he wrote it from the inside. He knew how power worked. He knew how emperors lied. He was skeptical of official propaganda and careful with his sources. That's why churches cite him. He's credible, he's not some obscure chronicler. He's one of the most respected Roman historians we have. His works, the Annals and the Histories, cover the emperors from Augustus to Domitian. They're detailed, they're critical. They're used by scholars today as primary sources for understanding 1st century Rome. So when Tacitus mentions Jesus, it carries weight. If Tacitus says a man named Christus was executed under Pontius Pilate, historians take that seriously. It's not Christian propaganda. It's a Roman senator writing for a Roman audience, documenting events in Judea that led to consequences in Rome. Churches know this. That's why the Tacitus passage is the apologetics gold standard. Hostile witness, impeccable credentials, no Christian bias. And that makes it all the more important to read what he actually said. He wrote the Annals around 116 AD, covering the reigns of the emperors from Tiberius to Nero. In Book 15, he's describing the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. The fire destroyed 10 of Rome's 14 districts. Nero's looking for someone to blame. Tacitus writes that Nero blamed the Christians, and then Tacitus stops to explain who the Christians are. That's where the passage comes in. He's not writing a biography of Jesus. He's not investigating whether the resurrection happened. He's explaining to his Roman readers why Nero picked this particular group to scapegoat. And his explanation is, they're followers of a man named Christus, who was executed in Judea under Pontius Pilate, and they practice a superstition that everyone finds repulsive. Here's the key part again. A most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judaea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. Mischievous superstition. Exitiabilis superstitio in the Latin. Some translations say pernicious, some say deadly. The word superstitio in Roman usage didn't mean what superstition means today. It meant a foreign cult, something irrational, something that violated the proper order of religion and society. Romans had a category for acceptable religion, religio. That was the state cult, the worship of the emperor and the traditional gods, the rituals that held society together. Superstitio was everything outside that. Mystery cults from Egypt, bacchanalian rites, anything that seemed excessive, irrational, socially destabilizing. Romans used superstitio to describe practices they found repugnant: human sacrifice, orgiastic rites, cannibalism rumors, anything that violated Roman norms of order and decency. Tacitus lumps Christianity in with that. He calls Judea the first source of the evil, not the birthplace of salvation, the source of a contagion that spread to Rome, where, as he puts it, all things hideous and shameful find their center. This is not neutral reporting. This is a Roman aristocrat describing a movement he finds disgusting. He confirms that a man named Christus was executed under Pilate. Yes, but he does not confirm divinity. He does not confirm miracles. He does not confirm anything supernatural. He confirms execution. And he describes the movement that followed as a plague. If you're using Tacitus to prove Jesus existed, fine. He confirms a man was executed. But if you're using Tacitus to confirm the gospel narrative, the miracles, the crowds, the fame, then you have a problem. Because Tacitus describes Jesus the way he would describe any other executed troublemaker. And he describes Christianity the way he would describe any other foreign cult the empire found threatening. That's what the full passage says, and the apologetics handbooks don't include it. Let's move to Pliny the Younger. He's the second Roman historian cite as proof. Pliny was born around 61 AD, wealthy family, well-educated. He studied under Quintilian, one of Rome's great teachers of rhetoric. He practiced law. He held various public offices. Around 111 AD, the Emperor Trajan appointed him governor of Bithynia, a province in what is now northern Turkey. Pliny was a prolific letter writer. He published 9 books of personal correspondence covering everything from daily life to philosophy to literature. Book 10 is different. It's his official correspondence with Trajan during his governorship. Questions about administration, requests for guidance, reports on provincial matters. That's where the Christian passage is, letter 96 of Book 10. The whole thing survives. You can read it. It's catalogued as Epistulae X.96. Pliny's problem is this. People in Bithynia are being accused of being Christians. Some admit it. Some deny it. Some say they used to be Christians but aren't anymore. Pliny's not sure what the legal procedure is. Should he execute them just for being Christians, or only if they've committed a specific crime? Should he accept anonymous accusations? Should he give them a chance to recant? It's an administrative question, not a theological one. In the letter, Pliny describes what he's learned about Christians. They meet before dawn. They sing hymns to Christus as to a god. They bind themselves by oath not to commit theft or adultery or break their word. Then they separate and meet again later to share a meal of ordinary food. That's it. That's the description. No mention of resurrection, no mention of miracles, no mention of Jesus's teachings or claims. Just, they sing hymns to someone named Christus, and they eat together. Pliny treats the whole thing as a legal nuisance. He's writing to Trajan because he's unsure whether being a Christian is itself a crime or whether they have to commit some other offense first. The tone is bureaucratic, detached. The way you would write about any administrative problem that needed clarification from a higher authority. And here's the important part. Pliny interrogated Christians under torture. He says so in the letter. He had 2 women who were deaconesses, ministri he calls them, tortured to find out what Christians really believed and practiced. This wasn't casual. Roman law allowed torture of slaves and lower-class defendants to extract testimony. It was standard procedure when investigating conspiracy or sedition. Pliny was following protocol. He wanted to know, is this movement dangerous? Are these people plotting against the empire? What do they actually do when they meet in secret? And what did he find? Nothing but a depraved and excessive superstition. Superstitio prava etymologica. There it is again. Superstition. Not a divine revelation, a superstition. Depraved and excessive. That's the conclusion of a Roman governor who interrogated Christians, tortured church leaders, investigated their practices firsthand, and tried to determine whether they posed a threat to imperial order. He does not say, I found evidence of miracles. He does not say these people witnessed something extraordinary. He says they worship a dead man, they refuse to honor the emperor, and the whole thing is irrational. Churches cite Pliny as proof Jesus existed, and Pliny does confirm that there were people in Bithynia in 111 AD who worshipped someone named Christus. But what he doesn't confirm is anything about who Christus was, what he did, or whether any of the supernatural claims about him were true. He confirms a cult, not a god. And the letter makes it clear that from Rome's perspective, this cult was a problem to be managed, not a truth to be acknowledged. Now the third historian, Suetonius. Suetonius was a Roman biographer who wrote Lives of the 12 Caesars around 121 AD. He was a secretary to the Emperor Hadrian for a time, which gave him access to imperial archives and official records. His biographies cover Julius Caesar through Domitian. They're gossipy, full of scandals and anecdotes, less rigorous than Tacitus, but still valuable as sources for daily life and political intrigue in the early empire. He mentions Christus twice, once in his biography of Claudius, once in his biography of Nero. The Claudius reference is in chapter 25. He writes, since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he expelled them from Rome. Christus, not Christus, the spelling is different and that's a problem. The Christus was a common name in the Roman Empire. It was a slave name, derived from the Greek word meaning useful or good. If Suetonius is talking about Jesus, he's misspelling the name. And if he's misspelling it, that suggests he doesn't know much about who this person was. He's just recording a disturbance among Jews in Rome involving someone named Christus. Now here's the thing. Suetonius writes as if Christus was in Rome, physically present, causing disturbances. The Jews are rioting at the instigation of Christus. The Latin is impulsore Christo, which implies Christus is there, agitating, stirring things up. If Suetonius is talking about Jesus, that doesn't work. Jesus was executed in Jerusalem around 30 AD. The Claudius expulsion happened around 49 AD, 19 years later. Jesus wasn't in Rome in 49 AD. He was dead. So either Suetonius is talking about someone else, some other guy named Christus, who was causing problems among the Jewish community in Rome, or Suetonius is confused. He heard about disturbances related to Christians, didn't understand the distinction between Christus and Christus, and assumed the guy was physically present in the city, causing trouble. Either way, this is not good evidence. If it's not about Jesus, it's irrelevant. If it is about Jesus, it shows that even a well-educated Roman biographer writing 90 years after the crucifixion didn't know basic facts about when and where Jesus lived. The second mention is in Nero, chapter 16. Suetonius lists the things Nero did during his reign, including persecuting Christians. He writes, punishment was inflicted on the Christians, a class of men given to a new and mischievous superstition. There's that word again, superstition, nova et malefica superstitio, new and mischievous, the same language Tacitus and Pliny use. That's all Suetonius says about Christians. He doesn't describe what they believed. He doesn't explain who Christus was. He just lumps them in with other groups Nero persecuted and moves on. So of the three Roman historians churches cite as proof, two use the word superstition to describe Christianity, and one might not even be talking about Jesus at all. That's the independent confirmation, a troublemaker executed in Judea, a cult that spread to Rome, a superstition that Roman authorities found repulsive and socially destabilizing. None of them confirm miracles. None of them confirm resurrection. None of them confirm divinity. They confirm execution. They confirm a movement. And they describe that movement the way Romans described anything foreign and irrational, as a superstition. I want you to think about the gap here. The gap between what the Gospels say and what the Romans say. The Gospels say Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Crowds followed him. His fame spread throughout Syria. He walked on water. He raised Lazarus from the dead. At his crucifixion, the sky went dark and the earth shook, and the temple veil tore in two. If any of that happened the way the Gospels describe it, Roman historians would have noticed. Tacitus wrote 15 books covering the reign of Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. He documented tax revolts in Gaul, minor skirmishes on the Rhine, changes in provincial administration, floods in the Tiber, earthquakes in Asia Minor. He wrote about things far less significant than a man who fed thousands, raised the dead, and caused an earthquake visible from Jerusalem. But Jesus gets one paragraph, and that paragraph doesn't mention miracles, it mentions execution, and it describes the movement that followed as a disease spreading from Judea to Rome. Pliny investigated Christianity firsthand. He interrogated Christians. He tortured church leaders. He asked them what they believed and what they did, and his conclusion was, they worship a dead man, and the whole thing is irrational. If the Christians Pliny interrogated had told him about miracles, if they'd said our leader walked on water, or he raised people from the dead, Pliny would have written that down. It would have been evidence of the movement's irrationality. It would have supported his case that this was a superstition that needed to be suppressed. But he doesn't mention miracles. He describes hymns and oaths and shared meals, ordinary cult behavior, nothing extraordinary, nothing that would distinguish Christianity from any other mystery religion circulating through the empire at the time. Suetonius might not even be talking about Jesus, and if he is, he thinks Jesus was alive in Rome in 49 AD, which means he didn't know basic facts about when Jesus died. So the question is, why is the Roman record almost silent? Why do we have 3 brief mentions, all of them describing Christianity as a superstition, none of them confirming anything supernatural? Either the miracles didn't happen, or they weren't significant enough for anyone outside the Christian community to care. Both conclusions are uncomfortable, and both contradict the version of events churches teach. I sat at my desk one night a few years ago trying to reconcile this. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I had a map open on the laptop, a map of Roman Syria in the 1st century. Matthew chapter 4 verse 24 says, Jesus' fame spread throughout all Syria. Mark chapter 1 verse 28 says, news of him spread throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. Luke chapter 4 verse 14 says, reports about him spread through all the surrounding country. I looked at the map. Galilee is small, maybe 50 miles north to south. There are major Roman cities within a day's walk. Caesarea Maritima on the coast, seat of the Roman prefect, major port, administrative center. Sepphoris, 4 miles from Nazareth, a city Herod Antipas rebuilt as a Roman-style capital, theater and all. Tiberias on the lake, another Herodian city, named after the emperor. All of them Roman administrative centers with records, archives, literate populations, connections to the wider empire. If Jesus' fame spread throughout Syria, someone in those cities would have written about it. Not Christians, Romans, Jews, Greek-speaking citizens of the Hellenistic cities that dotted the region, anyone keeping records of significant events. But the record is silent. No Roman governor in Syria mentions a miracle worker drawing thousands. No Jewish historian contemporary to Jesus describes crowds following a Galilean preacher. Josephus, writing 60 years later, mentions Jesus in two brief passages, one of which, the Testimonium Flavianum, scholars are certain was edited by Christians centuries later to make it sound more positive. I sat there looking at the map, Galilee highlighted, the Roman cities marked, the distances measured. 50 miles, a day's walk, a week's journey if you're traveling with reports of miracles and earthquakes and resurrections. And I thought, if it happened the way the Gospels say, why didn't anyone write it down? Not a hostile question, just a question. The kind of question you ask when you're trying to make two incompatible things fit, and you can't. If Jesus fed 5,000, where's the Roman report? If he walked on water, where's the record? If he raised Lazarus in Bethany, 2 miles from Jerusalem, a major city with Roman and Jewish authorities keeping detailed records, why is the only account of it in one gospel written 60 years later by someone who wasn't there? The silence is heavier than the noise. That's what hit me that night. The silence where there should be documentation, the absence of corroboration, where the Gospels say there were crowds and fame and events so dramatic the earth shook. I didn't have an answer that night. I still don't. I just have the question. And the question doesn't go away. Let me bring this back to the apologetics claim. Pastors say, even Roman historians confirm Jesus existed. And technically that's true. Tacitus confirms a man named Christus was executed under Pontius Pilate. Pliny confirms there were Christians in Bithynia worshipping Christus. Suetonius maybe confirms Jews were rioting over someone named Chrestus in Rome, but existence and identity are not the same thing. Confirming that a man was executed is not the same as confirming he was the Son of God. Confirming that a movement spread is not the same as confirming the movement's claims were true. Churches cite these sources because they need external validation. They need non-Christian witnesses who had no reason to lie. And these three Romans fit that need. They were hostile. They had no investment in making Christianity look good. So if they say Jesus existed, it must be true. But what they actually say is, a man was executed and his followers started a cult, and that cult spread, and we find it repulsive. That's the external confirmation. Not of miracles, not of divinity, not of resurrection, just execution plus cult. And here's the uncomfortable part. Churches present this as if it supports the gospel narrative, as if Tacitus and Pliny and Suetonius confirm the story. But when you read what they actually wrote, not the 6 highlighted words but the full passages, they describe something completely different. They describe a man executed for sedition. They describe a foreign superstition. They describe a movement that violated Roman social norms and needed to be suppressed. That's not the Jesus of the Gospels. That's the Jesus of Roman bureaucracy. A troublemaker, a cult leader, the founder of a pernicious superstition that spread like disease. If these are our best sources outside the Bible, what they confirm is historical existence. A man lived, a man was executed, a movement formed around his memory, but they do not confirm the theological claims. They do not confirm miracles. They do not confirm resurrection. They do not confirm that the man who died under Pilate was anything more than a criminal executed for disturbing the peace. And the churches that cite these sources as proof never read the full passages aloud. They quote 6 words from Tacitus and move on. They cite Pliny without mentioning depraved superstition. They reference Suetonius without acknowledging the confusion about whether he's even talking about Jesus. The pattern is the same pattern I saw in that Sunday school class 20 years ago. Highlight the part that supports the claim. Omit the part that complicates it. Present the evidence as if it's stronger than it is, and trust that most people won't go check the original. I didn't check. Not for years. I trusted the system. I repeated the quotes. I felt confident. Then I read the sources, and I realized the man those sources describe is not the man I was taught to worship. Spinoza saw this pattern in 1670. He didn't have access to Tacitus or Pliny or Suetonius the way we do today. Those texts weren't widely available in his time. But he saw the same pattern in the Hebrew Bible. He saw how institutions preserve what supports their authority and omit what doesn't. He wrote in the Tractatus Theologico-Politicus that scripture should be read the way you read any other ancient document. Compare sources, identify contradictions, Recognize that texts are transmitted through human institutions, copied by human scribes, interpreted by human authorities with human motives. And humans, when they have the power to shape the narrative, shape it in ways that serve them. He said, if a passage supports the institution's theology, it will be preserved, emphasized, copied accurately, and taught widely. If a passage contradicts that theology, it will be marginalized, explained away, reinterpreted until it fits, or quietly omitted from the versions people actually read. That's not conspiracy. That's not malice. That's how institutions work. It's how texts work when the people who control which manuscripts get copied, which translations get authorized, which interpretations get taught, have a vested interest in the narrative staying coherent. The Roman sources are a perfect example. They exist. They're accessible. Anyone with an internet connection can read them tonight. Tacitus Annals 15.44, Pliny Epistulae 10.96, Suetonius Claudius 25, and Nero 16. All of them online. Translated, free. But churches cite them selectively. They quote the part that confirms existence and omit the part that describes Christianity as a superstition. Because the full passage complicates the narrative, it raises questions that are uncomfortable. If the Romans who investigated Christianity firsthand concluded it was irrational, what does that say about the evidence they had access to? If Tacitus lumped Christianity in with other foreign cults Rome found repulsive, what does that say about how Christians were perceived in the first century? If Pliny tortured church leaders and still concluded the whole thing was depraved, what does that say about what they told him under interrogation? Those are not easy questions. And the easiest way to avoid them is to quote 6 words from Tacitus and move on. I'm not telling you the Romans were right. I'm not telling you Jesus wasn't divine. I'm telling you the sources your pastor cites to prove Jesus existed describe a man completely different from the man in the Gospels. The Gospels describe a famous miracle worker whose fame spread across regions, who fed thousands, who raised the dead, who caused earthquakes at his death. The Romans describe a criminal executed for sedition, founder of a foreign superstition, leader of a movement that spread to Rome and was suppressed by imperial authorities. Both can't be true. Either the Gospels exaggerate or the Romans missed something significant. Either the miracles didn't happen, or they happened in ways that left no trace outside the Christian community. Either Jesus was as famous as the Gospels say and the Romans ignored it, which seems unlikely, or Jesus was far less famous than the Gospels claim and the stories grew in the telling. The gap between those two narratives is the gap I can't cross. That's what I found when I read the full passages. Not proof Jesus didn't exist. Proof that the Jesus who existed in Roman records is not the Jesus described in church. And once you see that gap, it doesn't close, you carry it with you. Every Sunday morning, every apologetic sermon, every time someone quotes Tacitus to prove the resurrection, the Romans confirmed a man was executed. They did not confirm he rose from the dead. That's the truth the full passages tell. And it's the truth churches don't teach. If something in this doesn't sit right, look it up. Tacitus Annals 15.44, Pliny Epistulae 10.96, Suetonius Claudius 25, and Nero 16. All of them are online, translated, public domain. You can read them tonight. Read the full passages, not the 6 words churches quote. The whole paragraph, the context, the tone, the words Tacitus and Pliny use to describe Christianity. Then ask yourself, is this the external confirmation I was told it was? Or is it something more complicated? I'm not giving you answers, I'm giving you the sources. What you do with them is up to you. But once you read them, you can't unread them. And the gap between what they say and what you were taught they say becomes something you carry. That's what I found. That's what I'm sharing. The Romans wrote about Jesus. And the Jesus they describe is a man I don't recognize.